Welcome, dear listener. I'm so glad you've joined me. Whether you're winding down after a long day or already tucked into the warm folds of your blanket, thank you for choosing to spend this quiet hour traveling through time with me. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Is it early morning where you are? Or are we both up past midnight, oceans apart, sharing this moment in the hush of night? Wherever you are, you're safe, you're welcome here, and you're not alone. If you enjoy relaxing to soft stories from the forgotten corners of history, I invite you to subscribe or leave a gentle comment when this journey ends. There are many more slow, sleepy paths ahead, but tonight, we begin with the women of medieval Europe. Let your mind drift now. The sounds of the modern world fade, and the past gently opens. It's the 12th or 13th century. You're walking through a village where the roofs are thatched, the roads are muddy, and the wind smells of smoke and soiled church bells toll across the fields. The fire crackles inside a small stone cottage. Outside, women draw water from a well. Inside, they sew by candlelight, but beneath these ordinary things is something rarely spoken, something real, something every woman then lived through, in silence or in company, bleeding, birth, and the quiet strength of survival. There were no painkillers, no modern pads, no hospitals, just cloth, hot water, herbs, and the hands of other women. Over the next hour or so, we'll slowly explore what life was really like for women in the medieval world. When they first got their period, when they gave birth, when they feared, hoped, endured, and helped one another. From peasant girls washing rags by the river, to noble ladies gripping the edge of a wooden bed in labor. This is their story, so settle in, get comfortable, let your breath slow and your thoughts drift. Tonight, we go back to a time when women's lives were shaped by blood, by birth, and by deep, unspoken strength. Let's begin. In medieval times, when a girl's body changed and she began to bleed, it was the start of something. Every woman lived with a monthly cycle. Back then, people didn't use the word period. They said things like her courses, her flowers, or just her time. Some church texts called it the monthly purge. But whatever they called it, every woman understood what it meant. It usually started when a girl was around 12 to 14 years old, sometimes earlier, sometimes later. There was no set age. It depended on how well fed she was, how much work she did, and where she lived. Girls who were rich or well fed might start earlier. Poor girls who worked hard and ate little might start much later. The first time it happened, many girls were scared. No one had taught them about it ahead of time. There were no books, no lessons. Some girls thought they were injured or cursed. But once their mother, sister, or a village woman explained it, they understood it was normal. And now they could have children someday. There were no pads or tampons, no shops to buy anything. Women had to make their own ways to manage the bleeding. Most used linen cloths which they cut from old, soft fabric. These were called clouts. A woman would fold the cloth thickly and place it between her legs. To hold it in place, she tied a strip of cloth around her waist like a belt. The clout was tucked under this belt and rested against the body. Some women didn't use anything at all. In poor families, cloth was valuable, and not every girl had extra rags to spare. They simply let the blood flow. If they were working in fields or tending animals, they couldn't stop and wash every time. They'd wear old clothes and bleed into them, then wash them. At the end of the day, if water and soap were available, women had to wash the clouts by hand. They used water from a stream, a well, or a bucket. Soap was homemade, often from animal fat and ash. It was rough and hard on the skin, but it helped. After washing, the cloths were dried by the fire or hung in secret places. Most women didn't want others to see. them drying their menstrual cloths. It was seen as private and a little shameful. There were no underwear like we wear today. Women wore long gowns or shifts, sometimes with an extra layer beneath. So, the cloths were tucked inside and held with belts. They didn't always stay in place. Sometimes they slipped, punched up, or leaked. That was just part of life. Many women felt pain during their time. They called it cramps or the griping. Some felt sick, dizzy, or heavy in the belly. There were no painkillers. No doctors would take this pain seriously. So women did what they could. They drank herbal teas like mugwort, pennyroyal, or chamomile. They rested when they could. They used hot stones or cloths warmed by the fire to ease the pain. But often, they just kept working through it. Daily life didn't stop. Even during bleeding, women still had to bake bread, haul water, watch children, sew clothes, or work in the fields. Rich women might get to rest, but most others didn't have that choice. If your belly hurt or your back ached, you just gritted your teeth and went on. Some women bled very heavily. Some barely at all. Some had regular cycles, others didn't. No one had calendars to track days. So women learned to listen to their own bodies. They noticed patterns, how they felt before it came, how their mood changed, how their belly swelled or their breasts felt sore. When a woman's bleeding stopped for more than a month, people thought she might be pregnant. If it stopped without reason and she wasn't with child, it worried them. They thought her body was blocked or out of balance. They might give her herbs to bring back the flow like savin or rue. Sometimes it helped. Sometimes it didn't, but they tried. Some believed that bleeding helped remove bad humors from the body. In medieval medicine, health was all about keeping the humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile in balance. If a woman didn't bleed, doctors said her blood might rise to her brain and cause madness or fits. These were old ideas, but people believed them deeply. Men didn't talk about it. Male doctors didn't know much about women's cycles. If they were asked, they often said the womb was a wandering organ or blamed the moon. Most of the real knowledge came from women helping women, especially older women and midwives. These women passed down knowledge quietly from one generation to the next. There were also spiritual beliefs in some churches. Women weren't allowed to take communion or enter the church. While bleeding, they were considered unclean. Some priests preached that periods were punishment for Eve's sin in the Garden of Eden. Others were more lenient. Beliefs varied from place to place. Most women ignored those rules. They still went to church, still prayed, still worked. Life was too hard to stop just because of blood. Sometimes women had accidents, a stain on a bench or dress, a clout that slipped. When that happened, other women usually helped quietly, without shame. They all understood. Homes were small, crowded. A family might all sleep in one room. So when a girl started her time, she had to be careful. She learned quickly how to fold the cloth tightly, how to wash it at night, how to hide it in the corner of the chest or behind the hearthstones to dry. In villages, women talked about it only among themselves. It wasn't shameful, but it wasn't discussed with men. Some women worked as washerwomen. They often cleaned other people's clothes, including stained shifts and clouts. Sometimes people gossiped about whose cloth was especially bloody or strange. This gossip wasn't kind, so many women tried to hide their stained cloths or washed them in secret. When a woman reached her 40s or 50s, the bleeding slowed down or stopped. This was called the change of life. Some welcomed it. They no longer had to manage cloths or pain. Others feared it, thinking it meant old age or death. Some believed that a woman who didn't bleed could get sick from blood building up inside. Again, herbs were used, sometimes too many, which could make her ill. Throughout it all, the cloth was the one thing she could rely on. Folded neatly, hidden carefully, washed in cold water with hard soap, used again and again. It was small, quiet, and constant, just like the women who used it. This was life in medieval times. No soft pads, no pills, no bathrooms, just blood, cloth, soap, and silence. But women managed. They passed down tips, they helped each other. They found strength in knowing they were not alone. And when the next girl began to bleed, there would always be an older hand nearby to hand her a folded clout, to whisper what to expect and to remind her, "You're not broken. You're just a woman now." In medieval times, childbirth was part of a woman's life that brought both hope and fear. When a woman missed her bleeding, she didn't have a test to check. She just waited. If another month passed, with no blood, the older women in the family would nod and say, "You've got a little one coming." They watched her belly, her face, her mood. If she felt sick in the mornings or her back ached more than usual, it was seen as a sign. Most women knew what it meant. They had seen it many times before in sisters, neighbors, cousins. There were no doctors for childbirth. Most births were helped by midwives, older women in the village who had delivered many babies. These midwives weren't trained in school. They learned from experience. They had watched other women give birth and had helped with many labors. When the time came, the pregnant woman was not sent to a hospital. She stayed at home. If she was rich, she might give birth in a soft bed. If she was poor, it could be on a blanket on the floor or a straw mat near the fire. The midwife would be called. She might come with a helper, usually another woman. They would bring cloths, warm water, and maybe herbs. Men were not allowed in the room. Childbirth was a women-only space. The birthing room was made warm and quiet. Windows were closed to stop cold air and spirits from coming in. Some women hung religious charms or crosses on the wall. Others said prayers or held rosary beads. A midwife might murmur holy words while working, asking saints or angels to protect the mother. There were no pain medicines, no injections, no machines, just breath and time. Some women gave birth lying down. Others squatted or held onto a rope from the ceiling. Some midwives had birth stools, a low wooden seat with a hole in the middle. The woman sat on it, and the baby was caught from below. The pain could last for hours, sometimes even a day or two. There was no way to speed it up. The midwife rubbed the woman's back, held her hands, gave her cloths to bite down on. Some used herbs like motherwood or valerian to calm her. They might burn sweet-smelling leaves to ease the air. When the baby's head appeared, the midwife gently guided it out. She used warm hands and soft cloths. When the baby came fully out, she wrapped it quickly to keep it warm. Then she cut the cord with a sharp knife of thread, sometimes dipped in wine or vinegar, to clean it. But the birth wasn't over. The afterbirth or placenta still had to come out. This could take time. If it stayed inside too long, it could cause fever or death. The midwife would press the belly gently or give the woman herbs to help. Once it was done, the baby was washed lightly and given to the mother. If the baby cried, it was a good sign. If it didn't, the midwife might rub its back, dip a finger in wine, or even blow air gently into its mouth. If nothing worked, they said the baby had returned to God. The mother was cleaned and laid down to rest. She stayed in bed for several days, sometimes up to a month. This was called lying in. During this time, other women cooked for her, brought water, and helped care for the baby. It was the only time when a medieval woman was allowed to fully rest. People believed the mother was still open after birth, so she had to be kept warm. Cold air was feared. Fires were kept burning near her bed. If the weather was cold, extra blankets were piled on top. She drank warm broths and herbal teas to help her heal. Many women survived, but not all. Childbirth was dangerous. If the baby came the wrong way, or the bleeding was too strong, there was little anyone could do. There were no surgeries or blood transfusions. Sometimes both mother and baby died. It was called childbed fever or labor death if the baby was weak or dying. The midwife might quickly baptize it with a drop of holy water. Some babies died before they could be baptized, and this brought deep sorrow. People feared these souls would not go to heaven, so midwives worked fast. Some women had many children, 5, 10, even more, but not all lived. Families expected that some babies would die young. Still, each birth was greeted with hope. After the lying-in period, the mother went to church for a special ceremony called churching. It was a way to give thanks for her survival and be welcomed back into the church. She wore clean clothes and walked slowly. People blessed her. Some whispered that she was lucky. Others said she was strong. She went home and returned to work, caring for the baby, feeding the fire, grinding the grain. Life began again. Every woman carried the memory of her labors, the pain, the fear, the joy. It was a quiet knowledge, spoken only among women, passed on in whispers, in touch, in the heat of a small room on a cold morning. This was childbirth in medieval times. No bright lights, no doctors, just strong women, rough cloths, old herbs, and the will to survive. Not every pregnancy ended with a healthy baby. In medieval times, things often went wrong, and there was little anyone could do to stop it. Sometimes, a woman who had missed her bleeding for a few months suddenly began to bleed again. This bleeding was heavier than normal and came with cramps or pain. It meant she was losing the baby. People didn't use the word miscarriage like we do now. They said, she lost the child, or the baby didn't take. No one knew why it happened. They didn't know about infections or chromosomes or hormones. People blamed many things: walking too much, climbing stairs, eating the wrong food, carrying heavy buckets, having a fright, or being cursed. A woman who had lost a baby often kept quiet. She would bleed, cry in silence, and wash herself in private. If the pain was too strong, she might call the midwife. The midwife would comfort her, bring herbs like raspberry leaf or comfrey to ease the bleeding and help clean up. But there wasn't much more anyone could do. Some believed it was a punishment. Maybe the woman had sinned. Maybe she had bad thoughts. Others said it was God's will, a test, a warning. In many cases, the woman herself was not blamed, but fear and confusion always followed. Sometimes the baby was born too early. It might be alive, or not. If it was very small and quiet, the midwife would try to warm it, rub its chest, whisper prayers. If it died, it was wrapped in cloth and buried quietly, often without a name. A stillborn child, one that died before being born, was deeply mourned. If it had not yet been baptized, people feared for its soul. Some midwives secretly baptized the baby right after birth, just in case, using water and a quick prayer. It was not always allowed by the church, but women did it anyway to give the baby peace. Sometimes the mother died, bleeding that didn't stop, fever that came days later, a labor that lasted too long. There was no help, no surgeon, no way to open the womb safely. When a woman began to fade, turning pale, shivering, going quiet, the midwife would pray and weep with her. If the mother died, the baby might live, or not. The other women would care for the child. If the baby needed milk, they looked for a woman who had just given birth, called a wet nurse, to feed the child. If none could be found, they tried to feed the baby goat's milk with a rag or small spoon. Many babies didn't survive without their mother. People feared death in childbirth more than many other things. Women knew that each birth might be their last. That's why they prayed, asked for blessings, wore charms or tied pieces of holy cloth to their belts. Some carried small bones from saints or drops of blessed oil in tiny bottles. Church records and graveyards tell the truth. Many women died young, sometimes after their first baby, sometimes after the 5th or 10th. Rich or poor, it didn't matter. If something went wrong, there was no rescue. If a woman survived many births, she was called strong or blessed. If she lost baby after baby, people spoke in whispers. Some said she was cursed. Others said the evil eye had touched her. After a miscarriage or stillbirth, the woman needed time to heal, but life didn't stop. She still had to fetch water, grind grain, care for children. Some were given herbs to bring back strength. Others were told to rest by the fire and eat broth. There were also beliefs about spirits. Some thought the ghosts of dead babies stayed nearby. In parts of Europe, women hung garlic, herbs, or iron near their bed to keep spirits away. Bells were rung to scare off evil. These were old customs, older than the church, passed from grandmother to granddaughter. Women didn't always talk about what happened, but other women knew. They watched. They helped in silence. When one woman wept in the woods or sat by the fire staring into nothing, others brought her bread, water, and time. It was a quiet kind of care. Some women feared getting pregnant again after a loss, but there was no birth control, no safe way to stop it. So most simply hoped and prayed and tried again. Miscarriage and death were part of life, heavy, painful, but not rare. Women knew it. They lived with it. They found ways to carry the sorrow. And when a girl grew up and missed her bleeding for the first time, she was not only told about birth but also about risk, about what might happen, about the pain, about the danger. Still, most tried anyway, because to be a woman in medieval times was to face blood from month to month, from birth to birth, and still rise each morning to live another day. Once the baby was born and the mother had rested, life did not get easier. It only changed. The baby cried often. That was normal. It meant it was alive and had strong lungs. Most mothers kept their babies' clothes either in the bed beside them or wrapped in cloth tied to their chest. There were no strollers, no bottles, no baby clothes as we know them today. Just warm wraps, careful hands, and lots of watching. Feeding the baby meant breastfeeding. That was the only way a baby could survive. The mother would let the baby suckle whenever it cried. There was no fixed schedule. The baby fed during the day and also at night. There were no diapers, so babies often wet the cloths wrapped around them. Mothers washed and dried those cloths again and again. If the mother had died, or if she had no milk, people looked for a wet nurse, another woman who had recently given birth and was still producing milk. These women were paid if the family had money. If not, the baby might be given goat's milk or soaked bread. But this was risky. Many babies died this way. The first few months were the most dangerous. Illness, hunger, cold, all could take her. Child. If a baby survived the first year, people breathed a little easier. But even then, life was hard. Many children died before they reached 5 years old. Mothers did not name the baby right away in some places. They waited to see if the child would live. But when they did name the baby, it was usually after a saint or a family member who had died. Names were not chosen just for beauty. They carried meaning and hope. After a few weeks, the mother slowly returned to her work. Washing, cooking, spinning, farming. She would carry the baby with her. While grinding grain or gathering firewood, the baby was tied to her back or laid on a blanket nearby. There were no playpens, no toys. A stick or a carved wooden doll might be given if the child was lucky. Sometimes the baby was handed to an older sibling or grandmother. Girls as young as 6 or 7 were trusted to carry. and soothe the baby. This was how girls learned by doing, by helping. When the baby got older and teeth began to show, it was time to feed them soft bread, boiled oats, or mashed peas. There were no spoons for babies. Mothers fed them with fingers. Some babies were fed from a rag dipped in warm food or milk. There were no rules, just whatever worked. There were many beliefs about babies. Some people believed in the evil eye, that if someone looked at the baby with jealousy or anger, the child could fall sick. So mothers covered the baby's face with cloth or tied a charm to its wrist or ankle. Sometimes a pinch of ash was dabbed on the baby's forehead to keep bad spirits away. Crying was common, but if the baby cried too much, some thought it meant a curse, or that the mother had eaten something wrong. Old women gave advice: rub onion on the baby's feet, or tie a red thread around its belly. Others sang softly or rocked the baby for hours. Illness was always near. There were no doctors for poor families. If a baby had fever, a rash, or stopped crying, the mother might visit a local healer or ask the midwife for help. Some burned herbs in the room. Others said prayers. If the baby got better, they thanked God. If not, they wept quietly and dug a small grave. There were many graves like this in medieval villages, small ones close together. Some marked with wooden crosses, others with stones. Mothers never forgot those babies, but life forced them to keep going for the other children, for the home, for the work. As the child grew, they were taught by watching. No one sat down to teach them letters unless the family was rich. Most children learned by copying how to stir soup, how to clean wool, how to walk behind the plough. Mothers taught daughters how to cook, sew, fetch water, and care for younger siblings. Boys followed fathers or uncles into the field or workshop. There was little time for play, but still children laughed. They chased chickens, played with sticks, built small houses from stones. There were also times for stories by the fire, at night, or while shelling peas. Mothers told tales of saints, of lost children who were found, of clever girls who tricked wolves. These stories taught lessons: be good, be careful, listen to your elders, pray often. There were no schools for most. Rich boys were taught by tutors. Rich girls were taught to be quiet and polite. Poor children learned to survive. That was enough. Still, a mother always hoped that her child would live, would grow, would someday be strong enough to survive the winters, the hunger, the wars, and when her daughter became a woman and missed her bleeding for the first time, the old cycle would begin again. In medieval times, women didn't know about germs, hormones, or how their bodies really worked, but they believed deeply, sometimes in the church, sometimes in old village ways passed down by mothers and grandmothers. These beliefs helped them feel safe. They gave them answers when nothing else made sense. Many women believed that the moon controlled their monthly bleeding. When the moon was full, some said the blood flowed heavier. When it was new, they felt tired and sad. They didn't know the science, but they watched the skies and tracked the changes. The moon pulls the sea, they said. Why not the blood in our bellies? Bleeding was seen as powerful but also dangerous. Some said a bleeding woman could spoil milk just by walking past it. Others believed she shouldn't bake bread, churn butter, or touch plants because they might die. These ideas were not always spoken out loud, but many followed them just in case. To protect themselves, women used simple charms: a piece of red thread tied around the waist, a small metal cross tucked into a pouch, a tiny scrap of cloth touched. To a saint's shrine, these objects didn't have magic, but they carried comfort. Women prayed often. They had favorite saints for their troubles. Saint Margaret of Antioch was the saint of childbirth. Women wore tiny badges with her image or carved her name into the walls beside their beds. Saint Anne, Mother of Mary, was asked for help with pregnancy. Saint Bridget of Ireland was loved by many midwives. When the bleeding came every month, some women said quiet prayers asking for strength and cleanliness. When it didn't come, they prayed for a baby or feared a punishment. If the bleeding stopped for many months and then returned, some feared they had lost a child without knowing. They didn't have pads or medicine, so they turned to the church and old stories. If the pain was strong, some believed it was because of Eve's sin in the garden. We bear the pain for her, older women said. So they lit candles, crossed themselves, and whispered holy words to ease it. But not all beliefs came from the church. In villages, women still followed older customs, what people sometimes called pagan or heathen, though many didn't even know the word. These were just the ways they had always done things. They placed herbs under pillows, mugwort, for cramps, rue for protection. They burned dried sage or thyme in their rooms. Some chewed parsley or fennel when their stomachs ached. No one taught them these things in school. They learned from mothers, neighbors, and midwives. During childbirth, knots were feared. The midwife might untie every knot in the room on ropes, belts, even shoes, so the baby would come more easily. Some women believed tying a knot on purpose could stop a pregnancy. These were not rules, just whispers, but many followed them anyway. If a woman had lost many babies, others believed she was cursed or under a bad eye. In secret, a midwife might wave a smoking bundle of herbs around her, or press a warm stone to her belly. To chase the shadow out, they said. No one laughed. These acts brought comfort, and sometimes that was enough. Some women carved symbols on wood or bone circles, stars, or crosses. They placed these near the bed or in the folds of their skirts. These marks had no clear meaning to others, but to the woman who made them, they were shields. Dreams were taken seriously. If a woman dreamed of water, it might mean new life. If she dreamed of blood, she might soon bleed. If she dreamed of wolves, death could be near. So women shared their dreams in whispers over water buckets or while washing clothes. Other women listened, nodded, said, "Be careful this week." When a child was born, they believed it could be harmed by jealous spirits. So they hung iron scissors above the cradle or tucked garlic under the mattress. Some mothers drew crosses on the baby's forehead with ash. Some sang soft spells, no louder than a breath, to protect the child while it slept. If the mother died, the women cleaned her body gently. They washed her face, combed her hair, and folded her hands with care. They laid her in her best dress. Sometimes they placed a holy charm or small stone in her hand, so she will not go into the next world empty. All of this, the prayers, the herbs, the knots, the charms, was not foolishness. It was how women found meaning in pain, in silence, in death and birth. These small acts gave them power in a world that did not listen to them. And when a girl reached her first bleeding, the women around her gave her more than cloth and instructions. They gave her stories, beliefs, warnings, hopes. Do not wash your hair today, it will bring illness. Don't walk barefoot on stone floors during your bleeding. Light this candle when the cramps come. Bury the old cloths deep, so the spirits do not follow. It may seem strange now, but back then, these words were as real as stone dot in a world of cold winters, hard labor, and little comfort. These beliefs were a woman's armor woven from her blood, her hands, and her faith. In the medieval world, bleeding wasn't just something that happened once. It came every month. For years and years, for many women, it started as a girl and ended only when their hair turned grey. That's a long time to live with pain, mess, and silence. The first bleeding usually came between the ages of 12 and 15. Girls didn't talk about it much before it happened. There were no books or school lessons. They found out when it started alone, scared, or whispered to by another woman. When the blood came, it was called many things: the curse, the moon's tide, women's flow. Some simply said, "She has her days." It was not spoken loudly. People believed it was private and even dangerous. Once it started, a girl was seen differently. She could get pregnant now in some villages. That meant she was almost ready for marriage. Her clothes might change. Her work might change. But nothing was done to ease her pain or comfort her much. Most women had suffered it, so they expected the girls to do the same. There were no pads, no toilet paper, no soap like today. So women made their own cloths. They used old rags, soft wool, or folded linen. These were called rags or napkins. They tied them to their waists with belts or strings. Some simply bled into layers of clothing and washed them later. Washing blood out of cloth was not easy. There were no sinks, no warm running water. Women walked to the river or used buckets. If there was blood on the floor, they covered it with straw or wiped it with old linen. If it soaked through clothes, they kept quiet and tied a cloak around their waist. Many women had to hide the cloths, not just because of shame, but because people believed evil spirits could use the blood. Some women buried their used cloths in the ground. Others burned them. A few washed and reused them quietly, hanging them to dry only when no one could see. Cramps and pain came too, especially for young girls. There was no medicine for it. Women drank tea made from herbs like mugwort, chamomile, or raspberry leaves. Some warmed stones and placed them on their bellies. Others lay still and waited for it to pass. Sometimes they worked through the pain anyway, baking. So, in walking to market, no one gave them a rest day. Women were expected to go on, even if they were pale or dizzy from bleeding. People believed that bleeding cleaned the body. If a woman didn't bleed for many months, they thought bad blood would build up and make her sick. So, older women who no longer bled were sometimes treated with fear or suspicion. "Where does her blood go now?" they whispered. Some believed a woman's blood could make others sick. If she bled near the animals, the cows might give sour milk. If she touched bread, it might not rise. These were not facts, but fears passed down from grandmothers to daughters. Still, women helped each other. When a girl had her first bleeding, her mother or aunt gave her clean cloth, quiet advice, and perhaps a little bread and honey. When an older woman's bleeding became heavy, others gave her herbs or carried her water. There was no open talk, but there was kindness. Bleeding changed over time. Some women bled lightly. Others bled for days and soaked through many cloths. If a woman bled too much, she became weak. Her skin turned pale. Her hair fell out. People said, "She has thin blood." Sometimes those women fainted while working or cooking. There were no blood tests or iron pills, so people gave them cooked liver, red wine, or lentils, foods they believed could bring strength. Sometimes it helped, sometimes not. If a woman's bleeding stopped suddenly before old age, others whispered, "Was she cursed? Was she hiding a secret baby?" If it stopped and she was not yet married, it caused worry. If she had no children, people pitied her. A woman's worth was often tied to her ability to bleed, and then to bear children. But the bleeding didn't last forever. Somewhere between age 40 and 50, many women noticed their flow slowed. It didn't come every month. Sometimes it skipped one, then two, then came back heavy and painful, then stopped again. They didn't have a word like menopause. They just said, "Her time has passed." This was a strange season. Some welcomed it. No more cloths to hide. No more pain or mess. Others feared it. Without bleeding, they said, a woman's body fills with black bile. They thought it could bring madness, shaking, or strange thoughts. Some women felt hot all the time. Their faces flushed, they sweat at night, they felt nervous. Now we call these hot flashes or hormonal changes. But back then, people just said she was changeful or restless. Some gave her mint tea or cold water to cool her. Others left her alone. Still, most women were proud to reach that age. Not everyone did. Bleeding was a sign of youth. Yes, but stopping was a sign of survival. You had lived through the hardest part. You were no longer expected to bear children. Your work shifted. Your voice could grow louder in the household. Grandmothers taught the younger women what to do. Boil this herb, they said. Soak the cloth this way. Rest on the third day. These weren't written down. They were remembered, spoken, passed on like seeds. And that's how it was. A lifetime of bleeding, quiet pain, quiet care, blood, cloth, fear, and strength over and over until the day it ended. In medieval times, women had to rely on each other. When it came to bleeding, pregnancy, childbirth, and even death, there was usually one woman in every village or town who knew more than the others. People called her the midwife. She was not a doctor. She had no certificates, but she had something just as strong experience, passed down from one woman to another. Most midwives had delivered many babies. Some had no children of their own, but they had seen enough births to know what to do. Others were older women who had helped their own daughters or neighbors. They carried the knowledge of years in their hands and in their eyes. The midwife came when she was called. It could be day or night. Someone would run to her door. She is in labor, or the baby is not moving, or just come quickly. She would gather her bag or basket filled with herbs, cloths, a knife, string, and holy charms unfollow. She did not wear white. She wore the same clothes as other women, maybe a little older, a little stained. But when she entered a house, people made space. They trusted her. During a birth, the midwife gave calm words. She wiped sweat. She rubbed the mother's back. She checked the baby's position with her hands, no tools, no lights, just fingers and instinct. If the labor was long, she stayed all night. If the baby came fast, she worked quickly cutting the cord, cleaning the child, wrapping it in warm cloth. If the baby didn't cry, she rubbed its chest, blew gently into its mouth, or dipped it in warm water. If the baby still did not move, she quietly said prayers, then wrapped it and gave it to the family. This happened more often than people speak of. If the mother bled too much after birth, the midwife pressed herbs against her skin, boiled water, made tea, called for other women. She could not stop all deaths, but she knew how to try. The midwife did more than deliver babies. She helped women with their monthly bleeding, too. If a girl's flow was too heavy, the midwife would bring dried flowers or ground bark to steep in hot water. If a woman's bleeding stopped, the midwife might give her bitter roots to chew. If a woman had no children, the midwife gave her hope. Drink this, she might say, or sleep with this stone under your pillow. If a woman bled too much in old age, the midwife warned her to rest. Your blood is thin now. Do not carry heavy loads. Some midwives were also healers. They treated wounds, pulled splinters, cleaned burns, even set broken fingers. But they were mostly known for women's matters, the bleeding, the babies, the secrets. People both respected and feared them. If a baby died, some whispered the midwife made a mistake. If a woman got pregnant out of marriage, others said she went to the midwife for a fix. It was dangerous work. If crops failed or cattle died, and the midwife had been seen walking alone, she could be blamed. In some places, midwives were even accused of witchcraft, but most were left alone. As long as they helped and kept quiet, They were important not because they had power, but because they had presence. When pain came, the midwife was there. When blood flowed, she knew what to do. When a mother cried, she did not turn away. Midwives taught other women, not in schools but in kitchens, at wells, by firesides. A girl might help hold the towels during a birth. She might grind herbs or carry water. Bit by bit, she learned when the old midwife felt her hands shake and her knees ache, she would point to a younger woman and say, "She will take my place." That woman would begin the same work, quietly, gently, and with care. In hard times, like war or famine, the midwife still went to every birth she could, even if she was hungry, even if she was tired. When no one else knew what to do, the midwife tried. She did not get rich. Some paid her in coins, others in bread or wool. Sometimes she went home with nothing at all but thanks, yet she kept going, year after year. From first bleeding to last breath, she was there beside the women of her village. Not famous, not written in books, but remembered. For many medieval women, giving birth was the most dangerous moment of their lives. It was something almost every woman expected to face, often more than once. And though it was a natural thing, it wasn't safe. There were no hospitals, no doctors, in clean coats, no pain medicine. Most births happened at home on a straw bed, in a small room lit by firelight or candles. Most of the time, the birth went well. The baby came after hours of pain, and the mother held it, breathing hard, half crying, half laughing. The midwife tied the cord, the baby nursed. The mother drank warm broth, and everyone was glad. But sometimes it didn't go that way. Sometimes the pain didn't stop. Sometimes the baby wouldn't come. Sometimes there was blood, too much of it. Blood on the sheets, on the woman's legs, pooling on the floor. The midwife tried to stop it with herbs and cloths. The other women in the room whispered prayers, wrung their hands, and wept quietly in corners. If the baby was stuck, the midwife had to reach in with her hands and try to turn it. There were no gloves, no clean tools. She did it because no one else could. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it did in single quotes t. The mother might scream, or she might grow quiet. Her eyes might roll back. Her hands might go cold. The baby might be born dead, or alive, but the mother was not. And when a mother died during childbirth, the world went still in that little room. No shouting, no sounds, except the baby's cry. If the baby lived, the midwife would close the mother's eyes and cover her with a blanket. The baby would be cleaned and passed to a sister or neighbor. Someone would go outside to tell the husband or family, and someone would begin preparing the body. This happened more often than people now imagine. There were no exact numbers, but many women knew someone, a sister, a cousin, a friend who had died giving birth. Some women died after their first child, others after their fifth or sixth. Infection, blood loss, or the baby being too big could all be reasons. But people didn't know the cause. They just said, God took her, or it was her time. Some said it was Eve's punishment. Others said it was the devil's doing. Some said the woman must have sinned. But most simply cried, because they knew it could have been them. If a woman had died before the baby came, the midwife sometimes had to cut the baby out very carefully. If the baby was still alive, they tried to save it. If not, the baby was buried with the mother. The church had strict rules, but in villages, people often did what felt right. If the baby was alive, but the mother wasn't, other women took over. A neighbor who had recently given birth might nurse the child. A grandmother might take the baby in. Sometimes the baby didn't survive long without its mother, and sometimes it grew up hearing stories about her. After a mother died, other women washed her body. They brushed her hair, wiped her face. and dressed her in a clean gown. Sometimes they tucked a rosary or a tiny charm in her hands. They might place a white cloth over her face. Then they sat beside her through the night, praying, watching, remembering Dot, and even after that, life had to go on. The husband might remarry within months. Children still needed care. Bread still needed baking. But the women of the village remembered. They said her name quietly when new babies were born. They touched her grave on the way to the well. They passed her story to the younger girls. She was brave. She bore 6 children. The last one took her. Some women feared childbirth so deeply. They prayed to saints every day to be spared. Some took holy vows not to marry, just to avoid it. But for most, there was no choice. Marriage meant children. Children meant childbirth, and childbirth meant risk. Still, they did it, over and over. Not because they were unafraid, but because they had to. And because every time a woman survived childbirth, she came out stronger. She had faced death and lived, and the other women around her knew what that meant. They helped her wash, helped her walk, fed her soup, brought her herbs. She was a new mother, but she was also a survivor. And when her time came again, maybe a year later, maybe soon, as she looked up at the ceiling, took a deep breath and did it all again. Because that's what women did. In medieval times, many things were spoken loudly: church bells, market prices, babies crying. But when it came to women's pain, there was mostly silence. A woman could scream during childbirth, but afterward, she was expected to smile and go on. She could bend over in pain during her monthly bleeding, but still sweep the floor or tend the fire. If she felt sorrow, if she felt fear, she learned to carry it quietly. This silence wasn't always forced. It was just how things were. Women were taught from a young age not to speak too much about their own bodies. That's private. Mothers said, "Don't let the men hear you." If a girl asked about blood or babies, she got a quick answer and a quiet look. You'll understand when the time comes. And so, when the time did come, when the bleeding started, or when the pain of childbirth began, many women already knew not to cry out too much, or not to speak of it afterward. They learned to live with pain like it was a neighbor, always near, always there, but never discussed. But this didn't mean they were alone. Women shared things in other ways. At the well, drawing water side by side. In the fields, husking corn together. In corners of kitchens, while babies napped, they told stories in whispers. When I had my first child, I thought I'd die. Or my bleeding lasted 10 days. This time, no one shouted these things. They said them gently. And the other woman would nod and say, "Yes, mine too." Just those few words made a woman feel less alone. Sometimes, pain was shared with just a look. When a girl left the barn quickly, holding her belly, and another woman handed her a folded cloth without a word. Or when a wife sat to still at the table, and the neighbor passed her a mug of warm tea strong with herbs, no questions asked. There were even little signs passed down. A certain scarf tied around the waist meant she has her bleeding. A plant hanging over a door meant a woman inside had just given birth and needed rest. These weren't rules, but women noticed. Women knew. Sometimes pain was written in hands. Women who had lost babies held their arms differently. Women who bled too much walked slowly, like each step might break them. But even then, they went on. They sewed, baked, lifted, and listened, even when they had nothing left to give. There were women who wept, but quietly in the dark, behind closed shutters, into their aprons, into straw pillows. They wiped their eyes and rose early the next morning to start the fire. Their grief wasn't hidden, it was folded neatly, like their linen, and tucked away for later. And sometimes there were things no one spoke of at all. a woman who never bled, a girl who bled too much, a wife who never carried a child to term. These things were felt more than spoken. People noticed but said nothing. They might offer her a loaf of bread or light a candle in church, but the words were left unsaid. There were also women who kept everything inside, who never spoke of their pain, who worked and smiled and died young. They weren't saints. They were tired, and they didn't know another way. Still, within the silence, there was strength. It took courage not to cry out. It took strength to smile through cramps, to hold a child after a painful birth, to wash blood from cloth and still sing softly to a baby. It wasn't loud strength. It was the kind that sits deep in the bones. Sometimes women laughed together, not loud laughs, but soft ones between tasks. They joked about how clumsy their husbands were, or how their babies refused to sleep, or how their monthly bleeding always came at the worst time: harvest, festivals, long walks. Of course it did, they'd say, rolling their eyes. This was how they coped, with shared work, with quiet company, with knowing nods, with small kindnesses that never made it into the church records or the history books but mattered all the same. And sometimes, if the pain was too much, they went to the midwife or the wise woman, or even the priest. They asked for herbs, for prayers, for something, anything to make it easier. Sometimes they were helped. Sometimes they were told, "This is your lot, child. Be strong." So they were. Not because they wanted to be, but because they had to be. And because in the silence they had each other, not always in words, but in presence, in help, in shared glances, shared cloths, shared burdens. That was the way of it. Now the fire has burned low. The room is quiet. The women have finished their work for the day. Some are sitting by the hearth, spinning wool. Others are nursing babies, or folding cloth, or resting on rough beds. Their hands are tired. Their backs ache. But they do not complain. This is how life has always been, as far back as they can remember. And yet, the world is slowly changing. By the late medieval years in some towns, a few men start calling themselves doctors. They wear robes and speak Latin, but they do not deal with women's bleeding or childbirth. That work still belongs to women. Some monks write books about the female body, full of guesses and drawings, but they don't ask women what they feel. They write from what they've been told or imagined, and the real knowledge stays with the women, passed hand to hand. A mother teaches a daughter how to fold the cloth rags for monthly bleeding. An old woman shows a young wife which herbs to boil when the cramps begin. A midwife teaches her niece how to turn a baby gently inside the womb, all without books, all without glory. This is how it continues, year after year. There are things that begin to change. People build better houses. Some towns grow larger. The church tries to take more control over births and deaths. They write rules about who can baptize a baby, who can deliver one, who can speak about the soul. But they still don't bleed. They still don't give birth. So the real care continues in quiet corners, in dark bedrooms, in kitchens and barns, in whispers and warm hands and soft cloths, in pain shared without words. Eventually, centuries will pass, cities will rise, hospitals will be built. Men will write long papers about menstruation, childbirth, and female hysteria. But through it all, the truth remains. It was women who helped women. It was women who cleaned the blood, caught the babies, and sang lullabies in the dark. And even now, so many years later, parts of that old world still live on. In the way a friend passes you a pad in secret, in the way women share their birth stories in low voices, in the way mothers comfort their daughters during the first time, and the second, and the 100th, in the way that pain is still something many women carry quietly out of habit, out of strength, Out of history. So now, as the story slows down and the night grows deeper, let yourself imagine her one medieval woman. She's by the fire, winding thread around her fingers. Her belly aches. She knows it will be a long night, but she also knows she will get through it, as she always has. She is tired, but she is steady. She is silent, but she is strong. She is forgotten by the world, but she lives in you. Good night.